Let's look at some of the other elements of the strategic analysis. We can start by using the list at the beginning of the chapter on the strategic environment. We begin by analysing the degree of turbulence in the marketplace. Although the market is growing relatively fast, it is growing in a predictable way. This means that the degree of turbulence is relatively low. We can therefore use prescriptive strategies with some confidence. With regard to pestel analysis, there really isn't much to say. We can make a long list if we really want to, but in my opinion, it does not add much to the strategic environmental analysis here. So we won't pursue it further. However, you may disagree, and certainly the pestel concept is relevant in other cases. With regard to the competitive balance of power in the industry, we can undertake a Porter's 5 forces analysis. Let's start with the bargaining power of the buyers. In common with many markets where products are sold through distributors, there is the potential for some confusion here that is not clearly recognised in the Porter model. Essentially, there are 2 forms of buyer. The first is the buyer who actually purchases the product from the breakfast cereal manufacturer, the grocery supermarket chains like Tesco and Carrefour. These chains have immense buying power because of their size and importance for breakfast cereal sales. This is a key element of our strategic analysis since it will affect our ability to make a sale to the second form of buyer. If you don't get your product distributed, you can't sell it to the second buyer. The second form of buyer is the individual customer who walks into the supermarket to buy the product. Families, children, adults, and so on. Individually, these have very limited buying power. For example, if you or I write to Kellogs to make a point, we are hardly likely to make much impact on the company. By contrast, if Tesco writes to Kellogg's, they are likely to sit up and act immediately. Individual customers, therefore, have low bargaining power. We will return to individual customers in our analysis shortly. Now let's turn to the other competitive forces acting in the breakfast cereal market. The suppliers to the breakfast cereal manufacturers are companies that make sugar, oats, wheat, packaging and so on. There are plenty of these around, so in general terms, their bargaining power is low. With regard to the threat of new entrants, there are probably some other companies around, possibly the supermarkets wanting to launch their own branded versions of breakfast cereals. But we are new entrants ourselves. Thus, from our perspective, there is no additional threat. With regard to the threat of substitutes, there are clearly substitutes for breakfast cereals, but they do not pose a specific threat, which is therefore low. We'll return to new substitutes when we examine emergent strategies later. Finally, we have the immediate competition. The Kellogg's company is clearly important and forms a major part of our analysis. Now let's turn to the cooperative forces acting in the industry. The book calls this Lynch's 4 links analysis. We need to examine each of the 4 potential links between cereal partners and others in the marketplace to see whether any are important for our strategic analysis. The importance of such cooperative links and networks comes from their ability to deliver competitive advantage. Unlike some markets where government forces are important, breakfast cereals is essentially without such influence. Thus, government links and networks are relatively unimportant. Equally, we have no information that formal links and networks are important in this case. However, given the importance of the supermarket chains, informal links and networks between the manufacturers and the supermarkets may be extremely important. Indeed, it may be impossible to undertake business long-term without such cooperation. Moreover, the market growth is so attractive that supermarkets might be interested in a manufacturer able to make breakfast cereals to compete against Kellogg's. And it's a well-known fact that Kellogg's won't do this. They say that on their packs. Maybe there is a strategic opportunity here. Perhaps the new breakfast cereal company could negotiate to make breakfast cereals for the supermarkets. This would have the important strategic advantage for a new company of putting extra volume through the manufacturing facility and therefore make, as a minimum, a contribution to manufacturing overheads, perhaps even a small profit. Finally, there is always the possibility of strategic complementers. If you're not sure what a complementer is, then you should read this in the chapter on the strategic environment. In this case, one of the parent companies, Nestle, has a range of other food products, like its chocolate drinks and its milk products, that might provide opportunities for some form of complementary link-up. We've also seen that General Mills has some complementary products. Its North American breakfast cereals, for example, that could be introduced into Europe and the rest of the world. There is real strategic potential here. We'll return to this when we consider the strategic resources and strategic options shortly.